Okay. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Spring 2021 gathering of the Northwest Intentional Communities Association. We welcome you here to join us in upholding the spirit of community, trying to promote, maintain, and spread it throughout our world. It's become commonplace in meetings of many organizations to have what's called a land acknowledgement. And I'd like to do a special one because while all of us live on land that was taken from people who, taken from the first peoples who originally inhabited it by trickery or force, we can take responsibility for upholding the descendants of those people now and in the future. And in the spirit of that, I'd like to show you a set of values that I think will apply commonly to communities from some of those cultures. And it is here. The people around the Salish Sea, which is known as Puget Sound, the southern part of that, speak a language called Lushootseed. And this is a set of values that was handed down to us by Vi Hilbert, who is one of the best known preservers of that language. I'm actually studying this language right now, so I'm going to try to pronounce the Lushootseed, which you can see here on screen. I'll make it a little larger if I can. Okay, well, you'll just have to go with it. The first one is respect or hold sacred all of the earth. Respect or hold sacred all of the spirits. Remember or hold sacred the Creator. Be honest, don't you dare lie. Be generous, be helpful to your people in any way you can. Be compassionate, feel forgiveness for others. Be clean, you will be washed. Keep washing away all badness, dirt, and sin crime. Be industrious, and you will work always. Don't be lazy. So again, welcome to the gathering of the Northwest Intentional Communities Association. I'd next like to read to you from our website, giving you our purpose as an organization: to make visible the many models of successful, intentionally cooperative ways of living that exist, and support the efforts to build community wherever you are. We coordinate the exchange of knowledge and resources about intentional communities, not only to showcase how they benefit their members' lives, but to foster ecological, economic, and social sustainability in the wider culture. Okay. So now a number of communities have been good enough to let us know that they are here in the chat. So I'd like to invite each community to introduce yourself in, say, 2 or 3 sentences, and I'll try to model that for Bright Morning Star, which is where I live. Okay. So Bright Morning Star is a small urban cooperative household formed in 1979 in Philadelphia and moved to Seattle in the mid-1980s. We're small. We have about 6 people, equally divided men and women. Our common purpose is to uphold each other, and we work really hard at that. We have regular house meetings where we share what's going on in our lives, and we make every effort to just be there for each other as best we can. We do share our household costs pretty much equally, and we've run successfully. A number of our members have been with us for multiple years at a time, unlike many urban co-op houses where people just kind of flow through. So we feel pretty good about it, and we're glad to be here today. So how about Star Community? Would you like to go next?
Sure. So Star Community started in 2014. We are based in Seattle. We evolved from multiple houses, up to 5 houses at a time, but now we're consolidated in 2 houses in South Seattle with about 17 residents. And we have people who live elsewhere, but who are considered part of the community. And we don't have a written down mission statement, or we don't have a lot of structure. We're mostly based on process and relationships, I would say, and inspired by some visionary communities like Tamera in Portugal, for instance. Next.
Okay. And about how large are you?
Roughly 17 adults and 1 child, soon two children.
Great, great, thanks. Okay, how about Sangaya?
We have one of our founders here, Nancy. Maybe Nancy could say a few words.
Oh, you can say a few and then I'll say a few, Helen. How about that?
Well, we have other people here too, Sylvan and Anita.
Sylvan.
And Anita.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Nancy was there at the beginning.
All right. Well, we've grown since the beginning. And we're now, well, 1993, when NICA was incorporated, we were just in the dreaming stages. And we have since then developed the co-housing community in 2000, and now we're 21 years into that. And we have about 50 people in 4 different neighborhoods, making the greater neighborhood of Sangaya.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks. And we have some unnamed houses here. Peace Ray, do you want to describe your house?
Yes, so I'm living in a house with 3 other adults in Port Townsend, and we don't really have, I'd say, an organizing principle. I also consider myself a kind of a very extended member of the Star community. I was very involved in Star community for a number of years and lived in houses there until for 4 years until the pandemic, and came up to Port Townsend to be with friends and kind of get out of the pandemic risk, and I've stayed here ever since.
Okay, thanks. So Judith, can you tell us about Cascadia co-housing? Or Cascadia
Sure.
Commons, sorry.
That's okay. Yes, my name is Judith. I go by he, her pronouns. And our community is in suburban Portland. So right on the city line, on the property line.
Judith, are you still there?
I'm still here.
Okay, I don't know what happened there, but please continue.
That's okay. No problem. The first people that moved in, that happened in the year 2000. I know they had a very lengthy process to get the community developed. So we're 26 households. There's probably about a total of 50 people that live here. We're a multi-generational co-housing community. I've been here since 2001. So I'm part of the big wave of people that first moved in, but we were not part of the founding process.
Okay, thanks. And I see somebody here from Swan's Market Co-housing in Oakland. Can you tell us what that's like?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Yeah, my name's Neil. Nancy, I haven't seen you, I think, for over a decade. Good to be here with you, possibly more. Yeah, so I'm one of the founders and co-developers of a co-housing community in downtown Oakland called Swan's Market Co-housing. Swan's Market, it was one of the original, it's a historic landmark and was one of the original kind of market halls in Oakland. It's 10 blocks from the port, super busy in the 1900s, evolved over time, was completely shut down for 15 years until we said, shall we do this? And so we had a moment and we decided we will do this. And so we started our co-housing community in that building. We're on 0.3 of an acre, so compact, 20 homes. I'm thinking close to 30 adults nowadays. I think 5 or 6 kids. And let's see what else about us. Yeah, we're the 50th co-housing community that was built. I have a long relationship as staff, as volunteer, as board member with the Co-Housing Association, and I'm also one of the current directors of the Foundation for Intentional Community. Here
Great,
to be
thanks.
with you in any capacity you choose or I choose.
Great, thank you. We might call on you to talk about the foundation.
Certainly.
All right, what other communities do we have here? We have Ananda community. Christy? Hope you're still muted. There you are.
Everyone. Thank you. Hi, Nancy. Good to see you. I hail from the Ananda community in Linwood, Washington. For those of you who knew Larry Ryder, I live here at the same place that he lived. And we are basically an apartment complex on 5 acres. We have 32 units. And we basically all belong to the same church, Ananda Meditation Temple in Bothell. So there's about 45 people that live here, from children through adults. We follow the teachings of an Indian saint, Paramahansa Yogananda. So we're spiritually based, and I think our couple of our tenants here are helping people to promote their spiritual growth and also to share communities with other people. I'm just delighted to hear about you all because there are so many different ways that we can have community together. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Before we go on, I just want to mention one piece of Zoom etiquette that I'd like us to observe, and that is to please stay muted unless you're actually talking. And I'll model that myself, so just to mention that. Okay, JJ and Tyler from Rainforest Commons.
Hi, this is Tyler. Use they, them pronouns. Yeah, the Rainforest Commons, we're out here on lands traditionally stewarded by the Quileute and the Hoh near Forks, Washington on the Olympic Peninsula. We're going on 10 years old now, this community is. There are currently 5 members. We're a land-based community. We're on 5 acres. And some of our principles are decolonization, prison abolition, social justice, gift economy, and permaculture, I would say. Yeah. We have a mission statement. I was trying to pull it up just now, but I couldn't. So that's what feels alive to share.
Okay.
And oh, we have 1 more member on the way any day now.
Excellent. Excellent.
Baby. Yeah.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Sylvan just posted in the chat that she'd love to connect. So that's actually part of our purpose in being here today is to meet each other, to network as we're meeting. So very excited to see this happening already.
Yeah.
All right. So those are all the communities that identified themselves. Are there any communities that we haven't yet had an opportunity to post any info in the chat? Would you like to say a little something about yourself? Just unmute and speak, please.
I'm sorry, Jonathan, can you just repeat the question?
Sure. At the very beginning, I invited representatives of communities to just name themselves in the chat, so I would have a list. But if you didn't get a chance to do that and you're in a community, you can introduce yourself now. If you're not in a community, but you're forming one or you have specific intentions in trying to find one, now would also be a good time to speak, but please be really brief.
With Mark's permission, I would speak. We're just in different parts of the same house. Mark, is it okay? You can just nod your head. We have been looking at forming a community that is based on pagan ideals, a rural community with farming and not sure all of the other things. You know, it's like it's been talked about a long time, and so when I was invited to come here today, I thought this would be the best thing to be able to make some more connections. We've had connections with a number of communities in the Seattle area over time, including Star and Arrow Song House, and it's a long time dream for both of us.
Great, thank you. Okay, just want to make sure we didn't miss anyone.
Jacob?
Okay, go ahead, George.
You wanted me to go ahead.
Okay. Hello. We're George and Oceana, and we are just relocated to the Pacific Northwest. To Washington, the state of Washington, from Northern California, the East Bay. We are longtime members of the Lafayette Morehouse community in the San Francisco East Bay. And we relocated here to the Pacific Northwest, Kitsap County, Jefferson County, to see if we can form a communal situation for people of color. And while I think I read an ad in your newsletter a couple of months ago, didn't get any responses. Not that I expected to get any, but I am gathering people, people of color, and we have tiny houses in just completed design phase, and we're now actually looking for land to put these tiny houses and create community for Black, Brown, Indigenous people who want to live together in a safe space, safe, brave space.
Excellent. Great, thank you for being here. Okay. Oh, Lorna, go ahead.
I'm Lorna Lyons.
Hello, Jonathan.
I'm just on the board. I'm not sure why I'm reverbing. And I recently attended a Gen conference where they made the distinction to no longer describe yourself as a seeker, but rather a finder. And I'm in the Portland, Oregon area. And the reason I'm going after Oceana is actually here in the Portland area. I've been sort of adjunctive to a group of BIPOC people who are seeking right now and are looking at some land here in Portland that is being farmed and considering being able to add some tiny homes, et cetera, to it. And I don't know that they're going to settle truly in Portland, but I would be happy to link you to those folks because they are moving in the same direction, it appears.
Great.
So who is that, Lorna?
Yes.
Reach out to her on the chat.
Yeah. Thank you. This is exactly why I wanted to unmute myself and introduce myself, because you are exactly the reason that we're here. Thank you so much. Please send us the contact information in the chat.
Absolutely, I will. Yes, I will.
Well, thank you both. Okay, now I think Shannon was going to speak.
Let me try this here.
Yep.
Sorry for any interference.
So I'm Shannon. I have a larger home in Shoreline where we're creating a little community. We've had up to 5 people with a mother-in-law separate from the community, a person that lives in the mother-in-law, but we have 4 people currently, 3 generations, and we're doing a number of different things, and may form ourselves into an official intentional community in time. We follow a lot of permaculture principles, and one of our members is doing an extensive course in the next month in Guatemala. And we have a lot of environmental and social sustainability aspects to our community. Are very supportive of one another, and it's been a wonderful adventure. So I'm very pleased to be here today.
Great, thank you, Shannon. Okay, good. Is there anybody else who would like to introduce yourself? Whether you're in a community or not? Well, I think we've heard from almost everyone.
Well, I'll introduce myself. I'm Kay. I'm not in a community currently. I have a long history of being in communities. I'm here in the Seattle area. I used to live in a community in the Atlanta area, and I've lived in communities in Berkeley. And while I was in college, I was living in intentional communities. I have a house here, and I'd like to transition from living in a house where I am taking up a lot of space by myself to living in a shared community again. Yeah.
My name is Mark Davidson. Megan mentioned me. Basically, we're thinking about forming a community in a few years. And so one of my reasons for being here is to find out what makes, communities work. I mean, well, the more people you have, the more potential there is for friction. And I'm just wondering, how do you manage that?
Okay, okay. Thank you.
My name's Carol Butterfield. I live in Seattle currently, in a house. I lived in a co-op in college. Most of my friends were there because it was a giant state school. And I just liked the idea of community. My husband and I were vaguely looking at, forget the actual name of it, Anacortes. There's a co-housing community going in up there. And that was before the pandemic. We're not really sure of our timeline, but one thing that was happening is it was really happening too fast, and it was also going to be a big financial lift. And when you're not certain, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So really, I'm here to learn. And I'm very social. I've been called the mayor of Seattle occasionally. I think mostly in a flattering way. But anyway, so thanks for sharing.
Hello, I'm Sylvan Bonin. I use feminine pronouns. I live at Sangaya Co-Housing, which I sometimes slip up and call Sangaya Eco Village. I'm sort of hoping we trend in that direction. I have been friends with Sangaya since the founding, but only moved in about 5.5 years ago. And little did I know that I was the very crest of a wave of newcomers. I'm sure Helen and Nancy feel a little overwhelmed. The community is about half people who've only been here for the 5.5 years that I've been here or less. So I think sometimes the old folks feel a little overwhelmed by us. Permaculture is the closest I've ever found to something that looks like a religion to me. Not in a religious way, but in like a set of tenets you live your life by. And Sangaya is trending more and more towards incorporating permaculture as a part of our way of life. And that's really joyful to me. And,
I'd like to just add one other thing, picking up after something Mark said, I'm pretty social. My husband really is not. And it is his sadness that he's married to me. So one thing it would be interesting to hear in here is, you know, people that are not terribly social or more introverted, and what the experience of intentional housing or co-housing is like.
Yeah, I think seeing nods and thumbs going up, I think that topic will indeed come up in some of our discussions today. Okay, I think we've heard from everybody who wants to speak at this point. If you want to say anything later, the chat is probably the best place to do it at this point, because I'd like to transition on now to talk a little bit about our theme today and what we hope to accomplish. The theme, as our NICA board wrote it, is communities present positive, affordable housing solutions in the age of COVID. So you can kind of hear two elements in that. One of them is the positive, affordable side, and the other is the age of COVID, which I don't think we really have to describe. We're all experiencing it right now, and so those are the two main components of our program today. This morning, we're going to ask communities to share, a couple communities to share how COVID has affected their life together. Okay, and then we'll have some questions and answers about that. And in the afternoon, we'll have the what's called a fireside chat by a couple of experts on making community housing and in particular co-housing more affordable. Because I personally and a lot of other people believe that living in community is not only good for those of us who are able to benefit from it, but for the society in general by much more efficient sharing of resources and enabling us all to live more lightly on the land. So, NICA, the Northwest Intentionalist Communities Association, was founded in 1992 or 3, depending on who you ask. Okay, by a group of people who believed in those same purposes, that we have not swayed from those purposes in this whole 20 years. It started out with a big gathering in West Seattle of people who believed in this, and people who got together decided they had such a good time together just talking about the issues of living in community that they thought they'd better broaden it to the general public and keep meeting year after year. So that basically is what we've been doing ever since. We have semi-annual gatherings twice a year and other educational programs and resources as well. But this is our purpose, is to promote this kind of living and make it available just as broadly as we can. So I'd like to introduce, or have the board members introduce themselves and say a little something about why they're on the board. So I've just kind of said why I'm on the board. So how about Lorna? You want to be next?
Sure. Why am I on the board? Well, because it just seems like such a great organization, and there is, because I've been sort of attending these gatherings for quite a while, and just felt that it was such a great group of people, and that I would try to support by, actually showing up and trying to get some of the work done that needs to happen in any organization. So I feel like, I don't know, somehow the word journeyman is coming to me. It would just sort of, I'm in this process. I like what many people said about having been in community in my college and post-college life, but then moving away from it and hoping to return. So I think that's it. And I'll pass it to Florian.
Hi, so I've been on the board for the last 3 years, I think, but I started attending NICA gatherings since 2013, I believe, and I've got a lot out of them. And so when the board was looking for new members, I thought that would be a way to help make sure that the thing I got a lot of could be could continue. Angelique?
Hi, I'm Angelique Marchand. I've been on the board for roughly a year and a half, almost 2 years maybe. And I joined the board because I had been attending some of the meetings and had previously not lived in community, but it always made sense to me. And I also received so much out of being in the board meetings and seeing what it was like to live in community that I joined Star Community. And I want to be able to spread that, the availability of community to as many people as possible, because to me, it makes the most sense to me from a social, ecological, economical standpoint. So that's me. Peace Trey, would you like to take up the baton?
Sure. So I guess I've had a historical interest, historical in my own life. I've been interested in communities since I was a teen in the late 70s and early 80s. I lived in group houses in the Newark, Delaware area. And yeah, I've visited in early 80s, visited a number of communities, including some of you might be familiar with Cauliflower, which was an intercommunal newsletter in the late 60s, early 70s that was put out by a community that's been in the Mission District for decades of San Francisco. And then I, went away from that emphasis for a long time and came back and started becoming part of group households again in I guess 2014 and 2016. I moved into a Star Community House and was in Star Community Houses for the next 4 years, and then so I've always had an interest in working with nonprofits and not-for-profits. I've been on a couple food co-op boards in Newark, Delaware, and New Brunswick, New Jersey, and just pleased to be a part of this group of folks, and also pleased to be meeting all you folks. Let's see now, Anita, would you like to speak?
Oh, yeah, Anita's having some technical issues, but she did post a little introduction in the chat, which I'll just read quickly. I'm on the NICA board because I see intentional communities as these incredible hubs that have the potential to create space for us to be experimenting with how we can work collaboratively to live in ways that create regenerative human systems. Connecting these hubs of experimentation to share our experiences feels vital in creating a resilient regional community. And I'd like to give Anita a little more credit than that, and that she's the garden manager at Sangaya, so she is personally involved in doing regeneration, through her work, as well as what she's trying to do here with NICA. And this is so typical, This is the kind of people we like to have on the NICA board. So as you participate in our gathering today, I hope you'll consider getting involved with us. Okay, you don't actually need any special expertise, but we would sure like to have your energy. So, all right. Well, I think we're ready to move on to our first program. So, Florian, are you ready to introduce it?
Yes, I thought maybe Lorna was going to, but I can. No?
No.
Okay. Yes, no, Lorna?
Yes, please.
I can, sure. Yes, our intention for this next segment for the remaining of our time until I think noon is that we would invite all of you to share, those of you who are currently in community, to share perhaps the challenges, but really to try to focus on the benefits that you've seen while being in a community during COVID. I'm party of one. It's me and my cat, you know, and so I have a network of friends who keep me going. But I'm aware that there's just been some really amazing opportunities, it seems to me, about people being in community and being able to make that immediate pod and sort of rely on one another to weather this unique and difficult time that we've gone through. So our hope was that we would ask that people from each community could kind of in a tight 2 minutes kind of give us a sense of what benefits you have reaped from having been in a group at this time. And you can certainly make a nod to the challenges, but we're really seeking benefits and recommendations to share among all that are here about ways that they have been able to really weather this with more grace than might have been expected on the outside. And so I think that our board members who are in communities are going to lead off to kind of give us a sense of how we'd like to see this unspool. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Lorna. And so I was going to try to go ahead and model what Lorna just described. I'm in Bright Morning Star community. We are a small community. We practice something called cost sharing, which means that everyone contributes an equal amount to the budget, which then goes to pay for our basic living expenses. It is not income sharing because we don't put all our income into the common pot, but it is cost sharing, and that we try to be equitable in our living together. And that's enabled us to keep our costs down. We are able to continue to shelter people, who are relatively low income in the very expensive Seattle area, because we pool, because we think carefully about what we buy, and our finances are very transparent to the members of the group. This has given us a lot of strength in good times, and now in hard times when people are facing unemployment, having their jobs disappear, having their businesses go downhill, and just generally being under a lot of social stress as well. We hear each other out when we're having impersonal stress. Just providing a friendly listening ear without any expectation of rescue can be very, very supportive. So that's kind of the basis on which we're surviving COVID. There have been some difficulties, of course, in we've had to do some amount of self-quarantining within the house. Mostly because of external relationships that we have. For example, our adoptive grandkids, other adoptive grandparents are very, very sensitive to being exposed to COVID. So we've had to really juggle stuff, and it has not always felt good. But we know everyone's trying to do the right thing. Is that 2 minutes?
I didn't time you, but it sounds about right.
Would you like me to go next for Star Community?
Sure.
Will you take a question?
For Jonathan?
Sure.
I was just curious, do you accept labor in lieu of money or anything like that?
Yes, actually we do. But it's on a case-by-case basis. It's not a formal arrangement.
Right. Actually, if I can follow up, Jonathan, because what popped into my mind, and I know you've spoken to it within the board, but I think others might like to hear that. Didn't you say that one of your members lost their job? And so does that mean that the other 5 sort of fill in that person's share, or how are you handling that?
He has gotten enough government assistance that we've not had to go that far yet, but we do, previous to COVID, we had already set up that kind of arrangement where some of us basically hired him to do some of our house jobs, and then he was able to get by through that means.
Very good. Thank you.
So it's not, we try not to do things bureaucratically. We try to relate to each other
Lovely. Okay, Florian, I think you're up.
Yeah, so I would start by saying that personally, I've not felt lonely a single bit throughout the whole time of COVID. So that's definitely one thing that comes up as an immediate positive to my mind. But the first few months were kind of harsh in a sense that, you know, some people were really scared, especially people who felt more vulnerable to COVID or people who just had more fear in general. And some people felt more like they were not free because of other people. So it was a little rough in the beginning. And that's why I'm really glad that our community is so good at process and conflict navigation, that we're really able to hear each other out and to not just go into like rules or black and white solutions. But after a few months, as we started to understand more about COVID, and some people did a lot of research and installed these UV lights pointed toward the ceiling to kind of help purify the air, and other like protocols that we've been using. We did have a couple and a child go out and they got COVID, but because we had prepared with, you know, we had our protocols, they were able to isolate for a few days, and then they realized they did have COVID, so they isolated longer. So it was not spread throughout the community. Yeah, and other than that, I have felt pretty safe throughout. Even though I've been sad to all the networking and everything I was doing outside was not happening anymore. And now we have about 16, 17 people, and we do have our gatherings a few times a week in person. Sometimes we have guests, but not random guests, like people we've made connections with, and we talk transparently about our risk exposures, and depending on the situation, people wear masks inside, or we turn on the UV lights. So yeah, mostly, it started a little difficult, but we're coming out pretty strong out of it, I think.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Perhaps Peace Ray, does it make sense for you to go next?
Yes. So, I relocated here at the beginning of the pandemic, and kind of quickly realized that where I was pretty good in terms of where the county was, in terms, which has a relatively low incidence. It's like we're the second lowest incidence per 100,000 of COVID in the state. We have the highest vaccination rate. I think the main thing was that all 4 members of the House here were on board, on the same page with how we were approaching COVID restrictions. And also we were kind of very informed with that. One of our members is very involved with Jefferson County Emergency Management, has also been involved in volunteering for vaccination clinics. So a tremendous amount of logistical effort is involved for that. So the fact that we were all on the same page and we had a lot of knowledge about the situation was really helpful. And then we had kind of an electronic reach, if you will. As I mentioned, I've been involved with other nonprofits, so I was able to continue meeting with them, as I always been with Zoom, because we're one of them, which is basically fellow Wikipedians across the country and sometimes around the world. So we were already meeting with Zoom, so no difference there, except that the North American Conference had to go virtual last year and this year. and I was able to work remotely. And part of the advantage to living in, you know, a group house is, of course, we have, you know, we're fast internet here. And I think most of the communal houses typically have a fast internet. So it's been kind of a thing where, you know, I've had a close relationship with 3 other people, and then an extended relationship, whether it be work or nonprofit work, or also, you know, one of the things that Star Community tends to have is a practice called Forum, which is kind of a group get together to encourage transparency, modeled after ZEG Forum, which is used by the ZEG community in Germany and Tamara in Portugal. That switched to being online, at least on one night a week. And so I've continued some contact with Star Community just through that. So yeah, several different avenues for connection, and like I said, being on the same page within my own household, within our own household, has been really important.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. And we've got Anita, who is not having the no broadband problem that you assumed all communities have, because she's been having connectivity issues. So I don't know if she's popped anything in the chat about this in particular. Doesn't look like it to me. Can anyone else see? So yes, okay. So she's deferring to the fact that there are others from Sangaya who can speak for her. And so Sylvan, do you want to go?
Yeah, I think not everyone at Sangaya has had the same experience. We're a pretty big community, including people who live on the property and people who don't live on the property who are associate members. There's maybe 50, 55 of us. There's a lot of us. And so we've not all had the same experience. We chose early on not to, somebody mentioned having a ready-made pod. We chose not to do that. And everybody in their own little house is their own little pod. And in fact, we have at least one house, I think possibly 2, that separated into more than one pod within the same household for vulnerability reasons. So it's been just me and my husband and a roommate who has been sort of an invisible housemate. And so in many ways, I've been very lonely and very frustrated with that situation, because that's not really what I wanted from community. But, and I say this up front before the benefits, because in many ways, I kind of checked out of reality this last year. I was very not able to cope with much of what was going on in the world. And so I just turned on TV or an audiobook or a video game and sort of checked out. But once a week, at the very least, I came back to reality because we had a committee meeting that had been going since before the pandemic, every Wednesday morning and then later every Wednesday evening. And it has been delightful. It has been challenging. We have certainly had a lot of very strong personalities on this committee and very different approaches to things. Nancy's cracking up over there. But it's been a beautiful model of how consensus and love for each other can work through really challenging questions, and I think come to much, much better solutions in the end. So I think without that committee, I would have been much more of a mess than I was and possibly still would be. But having that committee work to do really kept me connected with my community. And I think that a lot of people in the community stayed connected with their committees more strongly than with sort of the general community as a whole. So our committee's got a lot done this year, a tremendous amount done this year. So our committees have been really, really good. They're smaller groups and it's easier.
Right. That's beautiful. I wouldn't, as an outsider, I wouldn't have expected that. That's incredibly great. So Helen, do you want to follow up on that? Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. I wanted to mention that there were some other sorts of connectivity things that were going on, but they were, of course, way disrupted by COVID. We still continued to make 5 meals a week for each other, but we served it as takeout instead of all eating together. But that took an amazing amount of coordination and attention to, who was willing to work with who and what windows needed to be open and, what time frames was who's going to do what. I mean, it was. And yes, putting together some kind of a 50-person group, whatever, has really been, as one of the people, Nancy will know this too, is one of the people who tries to figure out how to do that. It really has been very, very challenging. But our garden team, had a fabulous garden. The kitchen got remodeled. There was a pump house that was rebuilt. There was a plaza that was put in. There was just many, many, many projects that people did work on with each other, particularly those that could be outdoors, but even those that were indoors. When we had to take the kitchen apart, and originally we thought it was going to be a day and a half or maybe a day's, a few hours. Let's have the big barnstorm. Let's take everything out. Well, trying to get that organized so that no more than 2 people were in a closed space at any one time, and which was going to go where, et cetera. Like I say, the logistics were
amazing,
really, really amazing. So I'll also say one more thing, which was, as one of the vulnerable people, I received an immense amount of support from some guy that I certainly would not have had if I was just in some regular neighborhood. When I went through chemotherapy, I had meals delivered. I had people bringing flowers. And we have served meals to our elders, our most vulnerable people, for this now like year and a half, and we're still carrying the meals 5 times a week. We bring them a meal. So those are some of the things that Sangaya was able to do, even though, no, we could not meet everybody's needs. There were also, very sad experiences too.
Sure. Sure. Should we complete with Sangaya? I don't see our beloved. Did she have to pop off, or am I just blind? Nancy, is she there? Oh, there you are, dear one. I'm sorry. You're waving and gesticulating. I'm loving your background, so I think I was distracted by that, but thank you for showing yourself. So please have the floor.
Okay, well, Sylvan and Helen and Anita have already spoken about so many things that were the ups and the downs. And I think the other thing that made it challenging is that in the 5 years, and I think Sylvan mentioned this, there was a whole new set of people. And so diversity is critical and can be very creative, and it's hard because we had been we are not gated, but we had been fairly smaller and maybe the same. That isn't possible. But the new perspectives really brought a challenge, and beautifully. It's hard. It's learning a new language these days. It's I learned to swipe yesterday on my this thing, and I never thought I would be able to learn that, but here I am swiping, and I got so excited. Anyway, Oh, it's been amazing. Yes, I've been one of the people that's had meals delivered to me 5 times a week, and it was awesome. Not being able to be with family was hard. I did get into Canada because I was a mom and my son was a son that lived there. For a month, I had to isolate with my son and daughter-in-law for 2 weeks, and it was incredible. I never imagined that that could happen. I don't think it would happen now. I think they have closed anyway. But yeah, living in community, we're getting older. We have far fewer children, but I want to say that the young person, the 16-year-old came over today and said, look at my arm. Look at my arm. I just got my vaccine.
Great.
I was so proud because he's been worried about needles. So enough from me, but yes, thank you very much, Lorna.
Absolutely. And now, did I hear from every Sanghayan voice that can speak?
I think so.
Yes. Okay, very good. Wonderful. That was beautiful, and there were a couple really lovely takeaways. Thank you so much. You have a comment, Jonathan, or are you just stretching?
No, it's not about this issue. The people from Rainforest Commons were pointing out that people in prison, were needlessly exposed to COVID.
Of course.
And I was just responding that unfortunately that's not the kind of community that we represent. Prison people are there totally involuntarily. And I just mentioned the example of the Australian government was going to do that with the unemployed youth in the early 1970s. Fortunately, that idea got rejected, and those would not have been real communities either, because they would have just thrown people together and say, live however you can make it.
Right. Yeah, but absolutely. No, it's been a very difficult time for many people. But so we're just trying to harvest the positives and the challenges about what it's been like within community, because we know, and I know as an outsider that there are tremendous benefits, but I also am not naive about the complications and what people have mentioned about the fact that, the larger the groups, like Mark's question about, sort of the more people involved, the more different points of view, and certainly within COVID, even more so, of the whole issue of what people's perspective is on how careful to be, and that you're, like the cliche that whoever has the highest cleanliness standards in a home is the person who does more work because the other people don't see it or care. And so you have that on steroids kind of through COVID, So yes, I'm sure it's really complex. Does someone else want to share from a community? Yes, Angelique, beautiful.
I just wanted to let you all know that I had a bit of a more unique experience because I moved into community 8 months ago in the middle of the pandemic. So I had originally moved out to Seattle to take care of my mom, and had a townhome with her, and I got involved in the community and pre-pandemic, obviously, and then when the pandemic hit, I really started to struggle. It was just me and my mom in our little pod. And we eventually were able to pull in my brother and his family, but he has 2 small children. And so we had to be really especially careful because she is among the vulnerable population. And I was very much struggling mentally. I had a couple weekly calls with the STAR community. We had daily check-ins on Zoom, and we started our Zoom forum during the pandemic so that we would have an outlet for everyone to be able to feel support and feel heard. And moving in also meant that I had to isolate away from my mom for quite a long time until we sorted out our protocols and I felt safe enough that I wasn't going to bring something back to her. So it's been a real, for lack of a better word, a real journey through this pandemic to realize the needs that I have that are being met by STAR community in a pandemic, out even before the pandemic, the needs that were being met by being a part of the community. And then to actually feel isolated away from the community at the beginning of the pandemic was really damaging for me. Mm-hmm. And so to be able to move into a community that is so aware of the mental health of all of our members and the ability for this community to be able to navigate conflict has been just amazing. And then the knowledge that we have within the community of, you know, the brains that we have essentially that are willing to read all the scientific papers about mitigation of the virus with the UV lights and the airflow systems that we installed and everything. And so it's been, I don't think I would have been able to do any of this with just being my mom. And so it's meant that I can see her. It's meant that she can eventually come visit us now that she's fully vaccinated. And it's just, I can't stress enough the difference between feeling so isolated away from everything other than my mom, which she's an amazing human being, don't get me wrong, but away from my community, and then being able to move into it in the middle of this crazy time and feel embraced and have all of my mental, emotional needs met has been just thrilling. Aside from the fact that we have the economic sharing that we have here, where everyone, we've kind of normalized everyone's rent so that if anybody can't afford to pay rent, then we have kind of a budget that helps people, you know, we can make sure that nobody's left homeless. Nobody gets kicked out basically because they can't pay, which has been I think really helpful for those who have lost their jobs during the pandemic. So I know I'm probably over my 2 minutes, but.
Oh, no, but yeah, again, because we had more people sign up than are here, it's fine to run long, but I think that's really important. All the things that you described there about, you know, the emotional, mental needs. And I actually, if there's time, might want to come back to how you see conflict being resolved through the forum. Like, I think it would be useful to others to hear how that actually occurs, and some kind of example of it, perhaps. So you don't need to, I'm not putting you on the spot now, but you can put that in the back of your mind. But then that also bringing up that point about normalizing rent, which no one quite mentioned within Sangaya, but, you know, that is another thread of all of this, is that, you know, like, yes, there was a certain safety net that the culture suddenly provided with, you know, the unemployment benefits and putting a moratorium, you know, for people not being able to be evicted for lack of payment. But it's interesting to me, again, as being responsible for my own costs, to hear a little bit more about how that occurs and how that's being managed. So perhaps we'll just go to keep going through communities that haven't yet spoken, and you know, we've still got 50 minutes left in our segment here, so we can expand on comments and perhaps dig a little deeper after our initial run through. So it looks like, yes, Judith, by all means.
Thank you. So I would also say that I'm speaking for myself, and I'm sure everyone in my community would have their own version of what the last year has been like for them. And I would say it's definitely been a mixed bag. So there have been a lot of positives, and it has depended on the stage of COVID, of course, as to how we have helped each other. So initially, until other processes were in place. For example, people took turns shopping for others, going out to the grocery stores, and some people, we're a multi-generational community, and there's a lot of people over the age of 60 and people with health issues, so they didn't feel comfortable going shopping. So people took turns and went shopping. We have several school-aged children, and so two families created a pod with each other. And as these kids were staying home and learning through Zoom, those two families were supporting each other with looking after the kids. Some people donated their stimulus money. And because several people did lose their jobs because of COVID. And so, for example, people were able to apply to have their homeowners dues covered through the money that was donated. In the later stages, we've helped each other find information about where to get vaccinated. And I think that has been a really huge success because not everybody was as good about figuring out all the different processes that were in place. And so that was one of the things I was really active in, and I was really happy to be able to give lots of information to people about all the different places where you could go and get your vaccine. In the early stages of COVID, there was a daily, and then I think maybe later a weekly Zoom meeting where people just socialized over Zoom and checking in with each other. I have to say that we have stayed healthy. We have one person that most likely had COVID at the beginning, but it was at a time when there was no testing available. And from what he has said, we're pretty sure that he probably got it through work. There were some other people who were exposed and had to isolate. And so there was, it was nice to, for example, have the guest rooms available for people that wanted to isolate. Some things were surprising that we found out. So for example, people were really, there were some people here that learned all about Zoom technology and how to hold meetings. And we've had to adjust our homeowners meetings to do things over Zoom. And so what we found out was that for people who, for example, who had hearing difficulties, that it was hugely beneficial for them. And at the same time, I think especially the last several homeowners meetings that we've had, we have figured out that it's also really challenging when there's emotional topics that are being presented, or when things get derailed during the meeting, when we are not present with each other. And I wonder sometimes if, because of all the additional stresses that we've been under, and it's not just been COVID, it's been a year of protests since Floyd's murder. It's been the fires that we've suffered with. So there's been really a lot that our populations have experienced. And I think, so there is the positives of us helping each other. I think then there is the difficulties of we have to make decisions together, and we're not all on the same page as to what we think the risks were and how to react to that. And so I think there's been, at different times during this last year, a lot of friction as to how do we interact with each other when we encounter each other outside, for example, because we have kids, we have small kids that didn't know anything about physical distancing, and they just want to come and give you a hug, and where the parent then might feel that that's just really not okay and that he is misbehaving, and how do we react to that? Having the meal plan go away, I think, was difficult, and we haven't gone back yet to that, and don't know really how we're going to go forward, because of course at this point, none of us know what's going to happen. It's like, one week it looks like, well, the numbers are going down, then they're going back up. And, my big thing was, well, I don't want us to be like the restaurants that open and close and open and close. I would like for us to at some point come up with criteria as to when we think things can go back and how they should be. And I think it's been a great opportunity, like having this time off from certain things to decide, how do we want to do things? For example, how do we want to eat together? Because, we've had some really emotional things come up in the last few meetings, and I could really see that maybe just going back to the way that we did things before might not be the best.
Interesting.
I think that's about all that I can think of at the moment. Like I said, I think positives and negatives, communication has been difficult sometimes. And I think I would have to say it really has depended whether or not you were part of a family, of a couple, versus a lot of us are single, living by ourselves. And so I think I'm single. I felt at times that couples could not necessarily understand what it was like for us that were so isolated. And so I think there was a certain amount of judgment being passed as to how we socialize. And I think it has worked itself out over time. And I'd have to say also, the challenges were last year, we've had several households that there was turnover, and so new people came in, and so it's been really challenging how to introduce new people to a community when there's much fewer activities that we're doing together. What is the community all about? And at the same time, I would have to say, so I'm part of the little committee that does a newcomer orientation. And one of the things we found was that when we did it over Zoom, the advantage is being able to share some of the technology. So showing people like what our website looks like and all the different IT kind of tools that are available. That's not so easy to do when you do it in person.
Sure.
Yeah.
Very good.
Thank you.
That was beautiful, Judith. Thank you for both sides of the coin. Right.
Yes.
Thank you. Lovely. Anyone else? Oh, you're pointing at someone I cannot see because of the way.
Yeah, it's Neil.
Okay.
It's Neil.
Thank you. Hi, Neil. Thank you.
Good morning. Yes, it is still morning for us on the West Coast. We're all on the West Coast, I think. Gosh, first of all, Judith, were you looking at my notes?
No.
That was absolutely incredible. Thank you so much. I bow to Cascadia and to you, and oh my gosh. And I don't want to, we're trained not to necessarily repeat each other, so I'm going to be a little choosy about what I say, but gosh, there was so much of what you said that was kind of, moving, as well as just what I lived a few thousand miles south of you. I also just want to acknowledge, if I may, just Sylvan mentioning the L word, loneliness. Kind of Angelique also talked about mental health, and then that was kind of added, but this is kind of a darker area that we, some of us don't necessarily gravitate towards shining a light on, excuse the metaphor. But anyway, I just wanted to acknowledge that because I have some of that too. So anyway, some of the things that I remembered, so also, sorry, the acknowledgements, and also Florian for taking me back to the beginning of what was going on. And personally, on the third week of March, one of the founders of Swans Market Co-Housing who had left, excuse me, this is a little somber, who had left, and I moved her, a dear friend of mine, and moved her into a senior home, had planned with my assistance to end her life. And so week 3 for me of March, and you remember week 3 of March, we were just the tip of the iceberg I was going into this senior home that had already kicked in all of the protocols, temperature on my forehead. God knows how useless that was. But anyway, and just so on, so many of the new things that were kicking in. And so I spent, I think, 7 or 8 of Jean's last days leaving my home and going into this enclave where I was basically screened, and as a caregiver was able to be with her until after she departed. But anyway, I just had forgotten about that completely until you talked about the early days, Florian. Okay, back to community. So some of the things that kind of strike me that kind of were mentioned, but were also deep experiences for me were, I wrote down as the challenges, finding agreement, addressing everyone's needs, and getting the work done. So all of that's already been covered. Our particular flavor of some of those things were that we have people with different needs, wheelchairs, kids, young, old. And so, somebody mentioned the personalities word. Oh my gosh, what an adventure it all was to try and find common ground. But that really was the first thing. And I have to say, you can probably tell I'm not amongst the younger generation, but some of them were really digging their heels in, and they were like, I'm a superhero that, and really challenging to get them to look at, what we can live with, what transitions we have to make in order to all be okay, all not necessarily be a pod. That took months before that really happened. In fact, has it happened? I'm not sure. Anyway, it's kind of really challenging. And tripping over my own words. Probably as is reflected in lots of communities, we have a large variety of skill sets. 3 nurses out of 20 residents really kicked into high gear, and stubborn or not, we were kind of, funneled into this serious stuff and really trying to protect ourselves right from the start. And, and that meant that I was going to share my screen. Can I just do that just for a split second? I can do that without.
Yes, you should have permission to share your screen.
I do, thank you. So I just want to show you that this is where we live. There's 10 homes on each side, downtown Oakland, 18 feet in between our front doors, 0.3 of an acre. That big double space on the left is our common house. But the thing I wanted to point out is that, we just were on top of each other, and we couldn't really, hello, pussycat. We weren't really able to, it was a struggle for us to kind of avoid each other and to honor some of the things. So work day was putting blue masking tape down and creating little lanes, just to remind people and educate the kids that this is the space that needs to be happening, that walking needs to be happening in. Anyway, I'd want to just shift from challenges to the opportunities. Is there anything else in challenges? A challenge was in 2018 and 2019, I happened to be fairly proactive in the movement. I helped coordinate the resale of 3 homes inside of Swan's Market, which hadn't happened since the last time I did it, about 5 years before that. And somebody bought Jean's home. So we ended up having 7, gonna just call them 30s and 40s young professionals who brought in a lot of new, younger communitarian juice and really shifted the effectiveness and through their own clarity of right action throughout the March, April, May processes of these conversations. It was just wonderful to kind of have them be part of that. Anyway, some of the opportunities, it was interesting, somebody spoke it as I was writing them down. Our whole kitchen got completely redone. After, can I say, over a decade of conversation, all good conversation, and which obviously led up to the work occurring, no doubt. But finally, we kicked into a 5th gear to actually, the money had been there forever, right? But we just really needed to champion a community. Sorry, my partner just texted me. How urgent is this? Not too urgent. Okay. So anyway, yeah, kitchen got handled. I think a trellis got put up, a mural got painted over inside of the garden, so many things. On the human side of things that I'm also learning to be more sensitive to, my personal experience was that my language is that I witnessed a whole new level of love being expressed. And what I mean by that is that I feel like we came together in a way that we hadn't before, just like, if there's an earthquake or some chaotic thing that happens in our lives where suddenly the brain kind of shuts down partially, thank goodness, and we come together and do stuff. But so I was kind of bearing witness to what I think of as, I wrote down as just a high level of innovation, stretching, or a deeper sense of our values. And I just felt like the challenge, the chaos, the disruption kind of just called us forth to be, can I just say, better humans? Okay, I think I need to be done. Yeah, all the shopping trips and the rides and the nurses being there all just helped. I happen to be a technologist and also stepped in with the technology community and just shifted everything from in real life, IRL, to virtual. And for some people in their 80s, challenging. Fun for some people, but otherwise, and actually for some people who are younger also, I'll name. Anyway, what else did I want to say? Yeah, maybe that's it. I just wanted to have a chance to share my story. The standards, yes, somebody, I forget who it was, just named that small, powerful word. Forgetting COVID altogether, we already have challenges with the standards, but certainly once the pandemic set in, OMG. Okay, I'm scrumpling up my paper and appreciate my time. Thank you all. It's really great to be here.
So if I could add a little bit more, since Neil just brought up standards, one of the ways that we have come up with supporting each other, and this has been entirely informal, I don't think we even talked about it much, is to relax our standards. Some of them, and others that have to be upheld, like for cleanliness in the fridge, for example, we no longer insist that everybody do the exact same amount of work. We do in some areas, not in others. I just make it a part of my practice now to whenever I'm in the kitchen area to see what needs doing, whether it's my turn or not. And that I've seen immediate results from that. To let go of the, the individualist idea that that we each have to pay our share to be part of this group, and not completely let go of that, but soften the boundaries, I guess is the way I'd put it.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. That makes so much sense that, that just sticking by the regulations is part of what couldn't work because people had different points of view and different capacities in a way. Yeah, that's great. Is someone else want to speak? Because I'm realizing that there have been some interesting things put in the chat, including some questions, but I want to make sure that each group that would like to speak has been able to do so.
I can speak.
Great, thank you.
Commons. This is Tyler again.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I originally heard the prompt for the question as like, what are ways in which the community, like COVID has helped the community thrive or something like that, or that we've thrived in spite of, what are ways that being in community has helped us thrive during COVID?
Right, sort of as a benefit. Yes, we're really just thinking about it in terms of challenges or benefits, and that some of those could be unexpected.
Right, yeah, and I definitely felt like I had to dig internally to think of just the positives relative to the pandemic. It's definitely, as I've heard so many people share, it's been a lonely time for us out here. There are only 5 of us in out in a really rural, isolated area, and so yeah, that's been challenging. And then a big part of our community was actually that 3 out of 5 of our members out here we're doing a lot of volunteering in local prisons before the start of the pandemic, and building community in the prisons centered around mindfulness and like learning interpersonal skills that are really important in intentional communities, and also social justice. And I'd been doing that for like 5 years and then lost the ability to go into the prison and volunteer, and we're still not able to. So we lost a huge amount of community at that time. So that was really sad. And at the same time, I started communicating with some of our incarcerated friends through the means that the prison industrial complex lets us use, the very expensive technological ways of connecting with incarcerated people. So we have been able to stay in contact. A few of us have. So that's been really wonderful. And, you know, those relationships with those parts of our community, those members of our community, you know, have, I think our bonds of like empathy and trust and connection have grown in ways during this time, and yet we're not able to like connect with as many people as we were previously. Yeah, we were able to do a lot of prisoner support, and you know, being so isolated, everything moving over to Zoom has been kind of cool in ways. Like there's a group, Free Them All Washington. It's an abolitionist public health group that formed at the beginning of the pandemic that some of us have been active in, and it's just been really lovely connecting to other organizers and abolitionists in the state, and working on campaigns to try to decarcerate the state. That's been really awesome. We also, kind of at the very beginning of the pandemic, got involved with a group called Entre Hermanos that supports people in the Northwest Detention Center, which I guess is closing down now, which is amazing. It was supporting people who were in detention in getting connected with hosts who could support, ICE could let people out to hosts. It was such a wild thing to learn about. And then we were able, through Entre Hermanos, they work primarily with LGBTQ folks in Northwest Detention Center. So we were able to host a trans man from Guatemala until he was able to get his work visa and move on. So that was sweet. We were able to build 2 tiny houses. I don't know to what degree the pandemic impacted our capacity to build, but you know, we made it through winter while building. It was pretty wild. Yeah, and I think that in ways we've gotten closer with each other. I think in ways I've seen community members healing on their healing journeys regarding like trauma. We are in the process of forming a landowners co-op, which has had its ups and downs because of different stuff with the title and with our composting toilet. We're working it out with the state. And I'm excited about that. We're excited about being organized in that particular way. And we've out here in the almost 10 years that we've existed and that I've been here, there's no one's ever been charged rent. It's not, we don't do rent. And I think that if we had been renting, or that could have made things really hard during the pandemic. So it's been, that's been an important aspect, is being in a community that does cost sharing and is organized around gift economy. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's great that you can just sort of bypass that aspect. And because I had asked that question earlier, thank you so much, Tyler. Sylvan posted on here, and I'm not sure everyone can read the chat, so I'm just going to mention that when I had asked earlier how people had been handling it if someone among the community lost their job and couldn't pay their dues or their whatevers. She said, we had a couple of folks struggling to afford food, and because they have this is someone who's a Sanghayan. So because we have a very comprehensive food program, the 5 meals a week plus a full pantry, we were able to feed everyone and find ways for them not to have to pay for it. Either they worked in the community or just being lenient and presumably sort of letting go of the fees.
Nice.
So yeah, I think that's beautiful. And it's great to hear what all that you were doing or are doing around the local prisons. That's just really wonderful. But I can also hear the pain about the fact that you had to stop going there. I mean, what a difficulty that must have been. But I had just recently heard a program about the usurious fees of being able to keep prisoners in contact with the outside world, and you're just exactly describing it. Yeah. So, but that's great that you then built a bigger community by virtue of getting connected with the other folks who are working on the decarceration in the state.
Yes.
So kind of interesting plus and minus there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, did you have more to share in particular?
No, I feel complete. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We have, Jonathan wants the last 5 minutes, so we still have a good 15. And if no one else wants to share something, I was going to just open up the conversation about conflict resolution and how it's been made clear that that the forum serves that role within the STAR community. But I don't know if others have comments around, clearly we had issues with conflict and different people's scales of how to react to COVID. So does anyone want to tackle that?
Hi, I'm Tracy.
Hi,
I
Tracy.
use she, her pronouns. I think I'm losing my voice for some reason. I am not part of a community housing right now, but I just wanted to share a little bit about my experience. I found cooperative housing by accident in my late 20s because I was looking for an inexpensive place to live in college, and Seattle was really expensive at that time and still is. And I'm not being dramatic when I say that it changed my life. At the time, I was attending a for-profit art school and I was majoring in fashion. So I was in kind of like a complete opposite, a complete opposite kind of points of view of like the people that I lived with. And I lived at Bright Morning Star with Jonathan and Rosie Betz-Zall. And while, it's not the intention of Bright Morning Star, I was living with like-minded people who were politically aligned with me. I met my first male feminist and learned a lot about food politics and conflict resolution and communication. And it actually kind of extended to not only my personal experience, but through my family. And it's funny because I'm crying right now, but I'm realizing something that I learned through Bright Morning Star was that through the people that I met there, that I was okay to be emotional, that that normally like it is something that I would have apologized for, but it is okay that, you know, I be that way. And one of my best friends I actually met at Bright Morning Star, and in the co-op ad, her little blurb was late 40s, female pursuing a master's in social work, radical gay rights activist, lesbian Jewish witch. And so for someone who was in a fashion program at an art school and now is one of my best friends, who I've learned so much from. And, you know, I don't actually am in contact with Jonathan and Rosie much. I follow Jonathan on social media. And so I feel like, you know, these people are still a part of my life. But it was really a jumping off point for me to learn about so many things about, you know, food politics, the environment, you know, things that I was not exposed to. And, you know, being a young woman of color with, quite frankly, a Valley Girl voice, I felt, you know, accepted in this place where people were twice my age and had life experiences. And I felt nurtured and comforted and was able to, as a student, have that type of community and feel supported. Was just amazing. And, you know, I did end up going the apparel route in fashion, but, you know, through my journey now, I'm now a private label manager at a food co-op. And one of the first things that I always talk about is that is how I became exposed to it, was living at cooperative housing and learning about what organic means and what locally produced means, and learning about food allergies. And it's, you know, I had this conversation with Jonathan, and I was just, you know, so proud to share that, you know, one of the reasons why I have the job that I do now is because of this experience, and that, you know, the other people that I love are also able to kind of, you know, feed off my knowledge through that as well. So I just wanted to say thank you.
That's beautiful. Yeah, full circle. But yeah, that's such a great point, is just the fundamental of being exposed to people you would never otherwise meet, and therefore extending that kind of point of view about all the different things that you came to understand. Thank you so much for such a heartfelt share, Tracy. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And you're getting the love all around here. Okay. So anyone else feel drawn to a heartfelt share, or anything else to? Sylvia. Sylvan, sorry, Sylvan.
We were talking about challenges and benefits, and excuse me, I remember that one of the things that has been both challenging and cleverly solved, I think the pandemic and the racial tensions and the bizarre political situation have brought out really creative ingenuity in solving problems. That's been cool to watch. We have one member who is a grandma to several little children, two of whom live in San Diego, and their parents suddenly needed to work from home and had kids at home, and that was very challenging for them. And so she moved down there with them to be grandma in the house. But that meant that her little studio here at Sangaya was empty. And she has been astoundingly generous with that. She left the keys in the community and said, use it as needed. And people from another country were able to come over here and use it to quarantine in while they got some medical care in the US. We were able to have an intern last year. We thought our internship program was just going to have to close. But because he had a place to stay where he could quarantine in a kitchen, a bathroom, the whole thing, he could just stay in there, and we delivered food to his door. We were able to have an intern quarantine with us for 2 weeks and then come out and join the community. We've had, I went on a political trip during the election to help with voting in Iowa. and was able to quarantine there when I got back. We've had a number of people doing work in the community who don't live here, including caring for our toddler, who had a place to stay there. It's been, that generosity has enabled a lot of things to move forward, and it's been very, very, you know, an individual doesn't always have access to that sort of thing in a home. And with a whole community, we have a couple of guest rooms and this self-contained suite, and it's really made a difference.
That's
Daisy,
fantastic.
by the way, people keep asking.
What's the name?
Daisy. She, my personal challenge is that she got cancer this year.
Oh.
So
Oh.
she's become an incredible lap cat and very needy.
Which is a personal benefit of mine. when my cat's needy, I'm happy. So, but I'm sorry that there's an issue going on. But thank you so much. What a perfect example of something I wouldn't have thought of, but that is a beautiful reciprocity of somebody having to leave the community and therefore recognizing that the space could be so well used to keep so many people making their way through quarantine. Beautiful. Others want to share? We still have.
Maybe.
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Well, Megan looked like she had her hand up. Oh, no, she did not. Okay, go ahead, Florian.
Oh, yeah, just a few words on, so in STAR community, we talk about conflict navigation, not conflict resolution. And I'm going to just say my opinion here. I think conflict resolution kind of implies that we want to find a solution. And sometimes that quest for solution can be in the way of finding what's really going on. So we don't resolve all conflicts, actually. And some conflicts sometimes have lasted for a long time. Not at the moment that I know of, but so yeah, it's been more about being able to make spaces for where people can really go deep and share what's really going on, and explore that with them through feedback and whatever is needed. And so yeah, in COVID situation, that also has helped keeping some kind of fluidity, and even though there were like big challenges, we could, like, it did not lead to hard rules being created. Yeah, we're able to converge towards meeting everybody's needs. But for us, it's always been a big distinction between conflict resolution, which seems to me goal-oriented, and conflict navigation, where it's more of a process. And sometimes, yeah, and sometimes people call some of us process junkies. I just want to be honest about that.
Angelique, I couldn't quite hear what you said.
Oh, I was just, the idea of conflict navigation also is more relationship oriented, where conflict resolution to me sounds like, okay, this conflict is resolved and you either join or break. With conflict navigation, you're consistently joined.
And you're just shifting the parameters of your relationship. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, or even just coming to it's like there are agree to disagree moments, and there's like you get to really I think part of it is really listening to what's happening with the other person when you're in conflict, and really understanding where that person is coming from. And it's a big big benefit for community cohesion.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And I love that it went virtual so that you could at least have one time a week that was assured, no matter where people were. That's, I'm sure it was a real lifeline in this time. Yeah. Someone else popped on for a moment, but then disappeared again. So I don't know if anyone else would like to share anything. Go ahead, Rosie.
Okay, in February of last year, we had 2 people move out because they wanted to live together and got an apartment. And 2 people moved in February. And then in March, lots of things changed, right? So it was quite an amazing thing to cope all together with the changing situation. Every day it would change. And we luckily had good buy-in for, talking. And at that point, we were still having meals together, even though people were in widely different circumstances, because we didn't know we should be quarantining or whatever. So we were able to keep the conversation going about how to know what, especially the new people, were feeling, and let them know what we were feeling and how supportive we were for whatever everybody was going through. So that's it.
That's beautiful. Beautifully put, Rosie. Yeah, to know what everyone is feeling. Yeah. Okay. I do have a phone. It works. I tell people how I'm feeling. But for those of us among us who are the finders, yeah, we do what we can do. So if no one else wants to share any final thoughts, I believe Jonathan wants to lead us in song, and then we'll have our break until 12:45, and I can come back after the song and give you a little more detail on that. Any last call? Anybody feel moved to share? I don't see anyone waving. Okay. All right, Jonathan, I think it's for you.
Great. Thank you so much, Lorna, for leading that discussion. And thank you, everybody, for contributing so much. I certainly got a lot out of that, learned a few things myself. Whew. And then Rosie's testimony right at the end there brings us right to what I want to do next. Oftentimes at our gatherings, we've had sing-alongs. Fred Lanfear at Sangaya was just wonderful about insisting that we always sing, which I guess they do a lot at Sangaya. We do some too. So I wanted to share the words to one of my favorite songs about community. And the composer of this song said that it was about long-term relationships, but it's explicitly about community, which is why I love it so much. This is Fred Small. I'm going to share the screen with you so you can see the words. Please, everybody mute, but do feel free to sing along. There'll be several verses, so you'll catch on. This one. Everybody see that?
I certainly can. It's great.
Okay. All right, so everybody mute up, please. I will sing it. Brick and wood, mortar and plane, labor's love a little fade. You can see the structure taking form, ancient tools, a new design, taking care, taking time. We've seen so many houses fall before. We are building a house growing tall before our eyes. Stone on stone, watch it rise. We are building a house with our hands, with our songs. May it stand as long as our lives. As we tinker with the plans, gentle friends lend their hands, laying down a sturdy hardwood floor for the future from the past, room to change, built to last. Come the snows of winter, we'll be warm. We are building a house growing tall before our eyes. Stone on stone, watch it rise. We are building a house with our hands, with our songs. May it stand as long as our lives. And sometimes you'll need a vacation, I'll need one too. Sunning on the sand, running in the blinding rain. But after the recreation, we can sleep in our own bed once again. That easy chair you've always known, photographs from long ago. Thanksgiving Day parade moving in. So many books upon the shelves, so much more to teach ourselves. Under this roof we shall begin. We are building a house, growing tall before our eyes. Stone on stone, watch it rise. We are building a house with our hands, with our songs. May it stand as long as our lives. May it stand as long as our lives. Okay, so again, thank you very much, everyone. Please do come back at 12:45. We're going to have our special panel on making housing affordable.
Right. Oh, I was just going to share who was going to be there, but which is Sid Fredrickson, who was part of the NICA board for a very long time and is become a real specialty around co-householding, the idea of all sharing a home. And then her friend Pam Hughes, who specializes in helping people to actually buy a house that they can then share as a group. So she's built Seattle Co-Buy, I believe, or is that what the name of it is? I'm sorry, I can't remember. It was in the slide. Got it right. Okay, good. So please do come back. It should be a wonderful conversation. And we're going to let you all go off and release your Zoom fatigue and have some lunch. And we'll be back at 12:45.
Excuse me, and hopefully my voice will stay with us for the entire time. But I want to thank everybody for coming back after the break. We had a really rich discussion this morning on what community means to us and how we've weathered the storm, the COVID storm, and how community has helped us through that, and some of the challenges that we faced. And I think it was a really, really well-rounded discussion with a lot of different viewpoints. And it was very, very well received, I thought, for me at least. Again, my name is Angelique. I'm a member of NICA's board, and I am thrilled and honored to welcome both Pam Hughes of Co-Buy Seattle and our former NICA board member, Sid Fredrickson, who is now the head of Under One Roof. And they're here to talk to us about affordability and other benefits of co-buying and co-living. Thank you both so much for joining us. I think this is going to be a great hour. What we'll do is we'll open up with a few questions, and then at the end, we'll open up the full, everyone will be able to raise their hand and ask a question of anything that you maybe want more clarification on or would like to know more about. So Pam, I'd like to start with you. I'm really curious about Seattle Co-Buy. What pain points were you trying to solve? Like, what was the impetus for starting Seattle Co-Buy? Oh, I think you might still be on mute. There we go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Angelique, and thank you all for having me today. I'm excited to be here and to talk to you a little bit about Co-Buy and what we do, and kind of address your question, Angelique, about the pain points. So back in late 2015, my oldest son, who had studied abroad in London, was a classically trained economist, decided to leave his career in investment banking and do something meaningful. And so he came back here, and we had always kind of talked about, as he was growing up, doing a business together. My background, for those of you who don't know me, is in investments, real estate and construction. And I've always had a passion for real estate, specifically as a means for building financial stability and creating and protecting wealth. So my discussion is going to focus a little bit around kind of the affordability factor, because that's what drove us. Essentially, prior to starting our business, we said, hey, you know, be great if we all co-located. My son came over with a partner at the time. And so he and his friend and my husband and I all decided to try to buy something together. And what we found was that was very challenging. We had different surnames. It was a very competitive market back in 2015, as it is today, and will likely continue to be for the foreseeable future. What we found was that in a competitive market, it is only more challenging when you bring more people into the mix. Lenders don't like complexity. They like the path of least resistance. And so our offers weren't getting looked at, even when they were healthy and significant. And so we said, you know, we knew that real estate was broken. We know that there's much that needs to be done to make housing generally more affordable and easier to acquire. And what we discovered was that with an upward trajectory in housing prices and a limit to the supply and a need for more densification, that, hey, it kind of makes sense for people to combine resources to be able to afford a purchase. And we need a way to make it function in a legal and regulatory set of systems that really doesn't avail itself well to multiple owners and buyers. Everything's built for the single person or the married couple, all the protections at law and so forth. And so co-buy, the notion for co-buy was born. And in fact, at the time I was doing some personal real estate selling as a licensed agent. And at the time I had 6 different women, all in their 50s, living alone, who all wanted to purchase at about the $600,000 to $700,000 price point in Seattle. And, you know, they were all at their earnings level that they were going to be for the rest of their lives. And so they couldn't go higher than that. And they had enough equity or enough monies to buy at that price point, but not beyond. And I just kept thinking, gosh, if I could just get 2 of them to combine their resources, they could actually bring their purchase point down, their debt requirement down, and they could live better than they would living by themselves. So again, these factors all fueled the notion of co-buy. And what we noticed as we conducted essentially a year's worth of research about purchasing and co-buying specifically is that most people start with the looking for a house. And again, in a competitive market that we find ourselves in, what that does is lead to frustration and the inability to be ready. And it really takes a lot of time. And then when you bring in multiple parties to the decision-making process, it really is kind of backwards. You go onto Zillow or Redfin or whatever your portal of choice is, you look at houses, you go out, you tour them, you fall in love, you learn that, oh, I have to be pre-approved. Oh, we don't know what cash we have for down payment. We don't know whose credit worthy. We don't know who's going to be on the loan. There are so many things that disrupt one's ability to move forward. And mentally, you've invested in that house that now you've discovered that's not a house that I could conceivably ever afford or necessarily want to, even if I could afford, necessarily want to pay for, because the cost is, you know, what it is. So we kind of re-engineered the process so that it starts with planning and consensus building. And I think Sid will, you know, support this and go even further in that when you have more people involved in the ownership and the living circumstances, the planning and consensus building is vital to understanding, you know, where is it that we want to live? How do we want to live? Who's going to be owning? Who's going to be maybe renting? Who may just be a visitor or an investor or what have you? So all of that, that work needs to be done up front. And that's kind of, it's addressing those pain points that cause us to form COBI and do what we do. And Angelique, I know that was a very long answer to your question, but
no, that was brilliant. Thank you. No, that gave a lot of the background. I'm really curious because I at one time tried to buy a house and realized that just as a single person, trying to get my mom, I didn't know about COBI at the time, and trying to get my mom on the loan as well, it was disastrous. But you're not only talking about related persons like you and your husband and your son and his partner, you're talking about like with the way you help Star Community with multiple unrelated people on the loan. Can you talk a little bit about how that works when you have unrelated people and how that might work a little bit with the consensus building and the loan approval, the pre-approval process?
Yes. So great segue. In fact, I should tell you that when we say COBI, what we mean is any two or more people who may or may not be related to one another, who are pooling resources to jointly purchase and own. The co-ownership is a result of that joint purchase. So it's not just about the buying. In fact, it's more about the owning than it is just the purchase process. But really anybody, and in fact, one of the things when we set out to do this, we kind of thought we're making homes affordable for friends, unmarried couples, and maybe intergenerational households. And we thought largely that our audience would be first-time home buyers. And what we discovered was that wasn't the case. It was virtually anyone. And that, incidentally, so you know, first-time home buyers in the world of lending includes anyone that hasn't owned a home in the last 3 years. So you may have owned a home 20 years ago or 10 years ago, but if you haven't owned one in the last 3 years, in the eyes of a lender, you're considered a first-time home buyer, which is material because it can impact your lending costs. It can be an advantage in the borrowing scenario. So virtually anyone can buy together. The process is pretty much the same as with a married couple. While you're not afforded the same protections at law that a married couple is, which is why kind of we come into play, is to help you plan and do the consensus building and put the protections in place so that you have an exit strategy. You know what happens if any of the what ifs occur. What if someone dies or what have you. But essentially, you're combining resources. Your incomes are aggregated for purposes of the loan. Your down payment is aggregated, and that's down payment for the cash down payment towards the loan, but closing costs as well. And your credit score they take the lowest credit score from among the group. So sometimes a group may decide you've got 5 people, let's say, and one person has had a credit incident in their recent past. And so the group may decide that that one person not come on to the loan, even though they may be part of the ownership scenario or contributing in some other way. They may not be on the loan to start because you want to price the loan at the best rate for the group circumstance. So income, assets, and credit all combine to determine how a loan gets priced. And essentially, like I said, anybody, any combination of people's family or not, are welcome to participate.
Great. And then how has that worked with the lenders? Because I know you said at the very beginning, it's really hard to get just as a single person a loan and with all the pre-approval process. How have you educated, I guess, the mortgage industry, the lending industry on co-buying, and how has that worked?
Great question. So we have, what we did initially after going out and interviewing literally hundreds of loan officers and hearing from some of them, some who've been in the business for 30 years, is that even legal? What we discovered was that information is disparate, and some parties know more than others. Some have different orientations in who they choose to serve. And so what we did is we vetted and selected loan officers who were ready, willing, and interested to help co-buyers. Today, about 1 in 4 transactions is with what we call co-buyers, people who are not married to one another necessarily. And so it's a significant part of the marketplace, and yet a significant portion of lenders aren't well positioned to serve co-buyers. And it frankly is more challenging for them. It's more work. Sometimes they actually have to do what's called manual underwriting. So if they get beyond a certain number of borrowers on any one loan, they'll take that off their processing systems, and it goes to manual underwriting, which takes longer. And then again, in a competitive market environment, can be challenging. So the reality is that not all loan officers are created equal. And I say loan officers as opposed to lenders because it really is the human, not the institution, that matters. So, I can't say that this bank or this lending institution is necessarily better than that one. It comes down to the human that you're connecting with and what their orientation is.
Which also then would underscore the need to have all this done before you actually get to the process of buying a house.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
it's complicated. Thank you.
Yeah.
We are going to open it up in a minute, Mark, for questions. I see that you had a really great question about forming an S Corp. I kind of wanted to pivot over to Sid real quick. I really want to know the difference between what Pam does with co-living and purchasing a house together and what it means to be under one roof. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you to form Under One Roof?
Sure. Even though I have been a part owner of a home, like a single family home, and part of a big intentional community property, I'm not financially savvy. I'm not a kind of person who, like Pam, has a background in real estate and investment developing and construction. So my wheelhouse is the social agreements, the social permaculture about choosing who you want to live with and who's closest to you. And just like in the way that we design a garden or a yard or a whole forest with principles about what influences those things that are nearby and things that are harmonious and symbiotic, like we choose friends and partners and our closest mates with ideas that we we like them so much, we want some of their influence to rub off on us. We want to share our values and share practices and share meals and cook and do all these things together. And so co-living can be a mix of renters and owners. It could be all owners, or it could be all renters. And just living together under one roof seemed to encompass my familiarity and living experience in all of those, and getting asked to talk about that and being trained more in the process side as a facilitator and a mediator, and having, you know, kind of honed into what are the other resources regionally and nationally that are helping people find housemates or homemates, as some people like to call, and, you know, not just for a boarding house type experience, not only for what's cheapest. Oftentimes, you know, as we're here to talk about, a big driver is affordability, but so many other things that are about our health, our safety, and things that I'll get into later that drive us. So that is what I help people do, is sort of think through what are they aiming to really do, and what are people bringing to the plan, and to hone their values. And out of the group, there's some things that individually often assumed, just like in any relationship, even with one other person, but then you get many people and sometimes different ages and backgrounds, and people either who are legally married, some who are not. And I just want to point out from Pam's talk that is really key to talk about the person who's going to manually do things. It depends on how much they're willing to disrupt. What is, I just need to call out, a heterosexist, state-sanctioned partnership, when there's designated legal marriage, that those people get a preference. They are treated a certain way, and that's one of the many types of oppression on the wheel of intersectional structural oppressions that we have. And so that's just pointing out that it's systemic, and we have to find ways to gradually change it, but it doesn't change that fast. And many people, like at least 1 in 4, Pam pointed out, are doing co-buys that are not a traditional, like, well, deep-pocketed individual or a traditional legally sanctioned married pair. So anyway, I am familiar with just all of the different backgrounds of living together, and it also can be co-housing. And there are several overlaps of, like, some people who are wanting to live together and own a unit together, or a person who's an owner and they haven't ever had like a non-relative be a housemate. And sometimes there's room for sort of getting agreements clear and having, again, you know, actual behavioral agreements and values clarified before people live together in whatever configuration. I think that's enough.
That's fantastic. So you talked a little bit about the benefits of co-living. So there's the social benefits, there's the economic benefits. What would you, as we sort of, I guess in my head, I'm trying to define the differences between co-living, co-housing, and community. And can you speak a little bit to maybe the differences in, I don't want to say commitment level, but like the differences with, rather than a boarding house, like on the spectrum, you have roommates in college, or a boarding house, or community maybe at the furthest end, or co-housing.
Well, I always have said intentional community is a broad term. It's a description that is an umbrella term for all sorts of things underneath it that are different legal structures. So co-housing is one subgroup of an intentional community. There's other people who are just two people by themselves that have a vision to grow, and that's an intentional community, as say, like the Foundation for Intentional Community says. We don't try to define it, but we describe it, and we let people self-define if they see themselves as a community. It can be renters in a cooperative house. It could be actual co-op owners of a whole building, and they have a share and they don't own the individual, you know, there's just all these different legal structures. So all of that is community. And intentional community versus just like a community online of shared ideas, or something like, or a happenstance neighborhood community, because community is used many different ways colloquially. So I guess I just want to go back to the different benefits. which, just to kind of say, ecological was a huge drive for me in any kind of community, is being able to share the resources rather than have different units with each of us having appliances and each of us having to heat and cool that space and each of us having the various supplies and tools. And, you know, if it's a home, then, you know, talk about washers and dryers and vacuum cleaners and such. And so I really like to have the efficiency and the ecological benefit on the earth with our footprint on it to share as much as possible. I also think that that's just psychologically healthy. And because growing up in the United States, this hyper individualistic nation, I culturally have always pushed against this thing about each having to have our own thing. Emotionally, I think it provides the camaraderie at the very least. Hopefully, you know, you like and respect the persons that you live with enough that you're always kind of learning, you're growing, and the whole practice of sharing and cooperation involves a little bit of emotional vulnerability, but also a lot of personal growth. There's security for the person who lives in any kind of community, again, broad type, any style, as well as more physical security, because more eyes on the commons always just makes for like more investment in what's happening there, and other people can tell like, this is a busy, used, well-utilized, observed space. And I guess just sharing values not only gives someone a real sense of meaning in their lives when they can share it, but they actually can impact more by their purchases, by every decision made, changing the systems a little bit internally, how the community operates, as well as how it acts in the outside world, is just sort of a meaningful way to live for me. So
thank you.
I try to promote it. I'm a co-living advocate.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have, I don't know how many people have read Economics by Charles Eisenstein, but it sort of speaks along the same idea of like the sharing of resources. Like, why would you have an exercise bike that sits vacant for 75% of its life where you can share it? And if you're in a co-housing, co-living environment, then you're able to share resources like that. So something that maybe is this huge upfront cost is actually over time, it's actually used throughout its life in a more meaningful way.
Can I tell you one more thing on that?
Yes, please.
Just,
yes.
You know, not only the individual items, but access to property itself. Like obviously in co-buying, and Pam, I hope to go a little bit more into that. As a renter, even I have access to, if I'm going in with 2, 3, 4 other people, I can be looking for a spot that has, you know, my preference is to live in a house rather than an apartment. And so have access to a yard, possibly a garden, possibly more space, so that if we want to have dinner parties or any other kind of party or meetings or book groups, you know, that is something that's important in my life. So I want to have space to avail myself of these other kinds of creature comforts, whereas I would pay double or more to have a 1-bedroom apartment anywhere else paying market rate and living alone in Seattle. When you're buying, then, you know, again, location is super important, all the other amenities that you have access to if you're pooling with another person or set of people. And so that is like a main driver. I just wanted to, you know, go back again, renting or combination of renters and buyers, you can really do a whole lot more people.
Yeah, there's a lot more footprint of property that you can afford when you're with other people. I know for us here at Sky House, we have an amazing community garden. Sangaya has got an amazing garden. And it also helps, like in the long term, theoretically, with food costs and things of that nature as well. I kind of want to ask both of you this too. The whole idea of, like this morning, we talked about COVID and how being in community has helped or hindered, or, you know, the challenges that we faced. What are the trends that you've seen, especially over these last 18 months in co-buying, in co-living, in renting with multiple people? Have you noticed anything? Like, what are the big overarching trends that you've seen happening?
So Angelique, you want me to go first?
Sure, please.
Okay. So we actually have done a survey of people interested to co-buy. So people who self-reported they were going to co-buy and co-own within the next 2 years, and asked some questions about this. And we've also observed from our audience and people who get in touch who don't necessarily co-buy with us. But what we're seeing is a movement away from downtown cores in expensive areas. And I will tell you that we serve today the West Coast. So we're working not only in Seattle, but in the Bay Area and LA and other West Coast cities. So we're seeing a movement out of the downtown cores to some degree. We're seeing movement to the suburbs. We're seeing bigger properties. To your point and Sid's point, the economies of scale you can get in sharing a home with a bigger footprint, where you can have an exercise or a Zoom room or whatever, where the parties in the home can have a place to go to office or work from home and so forth, has been important. We're also seeing people move out to the country. We actually had a number of people move from like Bay Area to places like Nevada City, which is a area outside of Sacramento that's kind of rural, but you can get a lot more house for your money. But the work from home circumstance has kind of opened up that opportunity, and people are interested to have their own gardens and grow food and that sort of thing. So we've definitely seen that. And we're seeing more mixed parties or people saying that they want to buy with friends, whereas in the past, multi-generational and unmarried couples have been kind of the norm amongst the co-buying groups. We're seeing more people saying, hey, yeah, we want to mix it up. Maybe there's some family members like a married couple, but with friends or multiple friends or whatever. So that's kind of what we're noticing and learning from the folks who are kind of looking out to the future to do this.
Thank you. Sid?
Sorry, I'm trying to figure out a couple ways to share. I don't know if the last thing, yeah, so that doesn't work the way I did it, but I'll put it in OneDrive and I have a couple things I'll share later. So yeah, with the influence of COVID, I know that immediately when our household heard about this, we were asking around and looking at some national sites and found that, you know, overall our outlook was being resources to each other, and that there were just some practices that we would follow. And then NICA last spring shared a couple of different documents and pointed to other resources that people in any kind of co-living situation might look into. I know I looked into some different things, just like statistics, what's been happening and how's that impacted affordability. A lot of people have said, just anecdotes I've heard, well, it's really made either us think about who do we want to live with, and, you know, going forward, acting on some of those feelings of like, who's in our sort of emotional pod anyway. And so considering living closer together or actually in the same sort of unit. So then I was just looking at our area and what has been happening during this period of time. There's, like I said, 2 papers I'll share, but just for some data, the CARES Act federally, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, which was enacted early on in March 2020, had 2 funding streams. And as of October 2020, $3.9 billion went to emergency rental assistance alone. And there's this whole study that was watching like what were qualifications. More people applied for it than actually got it. That still is falling short of most of the estimated COVID-19 related needs. Then here, like in Washington State, we still are having, you know, the statewide evictions being prevented, and that's trying to stem unplanned evictions or preventing homelessness, because then that just impacts everybody in another even more horrible way. Let's see, I just wanted to read, I announced as we were still just coming back from the break, Washington has a current extension for renters that you cannot be evicted really without, there's some very narrow definitions, like if the owner needs to move back in and use that as a primary residence. But in most cases, through the end of June this year, 2021, there's a bunch of other resources, but they cannot raise rent or evict you if you're a renter right now. I think that's all really I have to say out loud. There's there's a good Seattle Times article for Seattle specific folks. 136,300 households, or 9.6, are behind in their rent right now. This came out in last month. Also just for homeowners, that there's a lot of homeowners, a little bit less percentage-wise, like 6.5% statewide homeowners are not caught up with their mortgage payments. So just interesting facts that just being scared in a way that maybe people who've only been alive for a few decades, you know, in their 30s and 40s, or even no matter what stage, people either lost jobs, had wages cut, had hours cut, all sorts of industries that just because of not being able to be in person, entertainment, hospitality, a lot of people are getting less or drastically cut wages. So if they never conceived of it before, they are sure thinking about how to pool resources now.
Absolutely. I know several people that have had issues with paying their rent, not in Star Community because we umbrella our community really well. But there's been so much, there's so much fear about when the eviction moratorium ends, what people are going to do with their families, even not just single people, but people with children. And it seems like the perfect alternative to being able to have a group of people with whom you can pool your resources and not be out on the street. And maybe, if we can get more of, get the word out a little bit more on how we can, the different options that people have open to them. I'm really curious as well about specific demographics. Like, we know that it's harder for people of color or non-traditional couples, or how has this been helpful for people who have been harder or had more difficult time in finding rent or finding a place to buy? I'm not sure if you wanted to answer that first, Sid, since you were just on a roll.
I don't have studies exactly, except that people kind of froze up about even looking at places. There's been a lot less of units available because if it was a corporate, some of them remained available, but people were cautious about moving just because of all the interactions involved. And then for buying a house, the market was very tight, and Pam can talk about that, like what it's meant that supply was so low, but supply has been low for renters too. And so everyone kind of stayed longer and have been thinking more creatively what they could do, I think, more or less when, things were over and it wasn't such of a, I don't really shut down seems extreme, but when things were less restrictive, they've been making plans for what would be more ideal. I'll leave it at that. Give Pam some time.
So yeah, I agree. I think that people have been pent up. I think that there is more awareness that people can pool resources. There are some cultures for whom credit is not necessarily been deemed a positive. And what I'm noticing is in the younger folks who may be second or third generation, particularly Hispanic, where credit was kind of frowned upon, I'm seeing more of an openness to credit. And so I'm seeing that particular population coming out together and looking for places. And I think just the whole evolution of the American society to more of a melting pot circumstance is causing people to kind of open their minds to the possibilities. I think all of you probably are very aware of, loneliness and how loneliness plays such a huge and impactful role in our health and well-being and so forth. And I think as people become more and more in tune with that notion, the openness to pooling living circumstances for all the benefits, affordability, for community, and ecological reasons, I think is just causing people to kind of come out of the woodwork and think differently. Pandemic, I think, has been, if there's one positive from the pandemic, it's that people are learning to think differently and learning we have to adapt. And this is a huge opportunity for all of us to think, how can we do more and better and differently with the limited resources we have?
Yeah, I think necessity is the mother of invention, right? We all come up with, when pushed into a corner, we have more of an ability to think creatively on solutioning. I would really like to open it up to anyone else who has any questions. Mark, I know that you had put something in the chat a bit ago. I haven't been able to keep up with the chat, so I'm not sure if your question was answered or not. But if you'd like to go ahead and unmute yourself and speak.
Oh, excuse me. Yes, basically I was asking if forming an S corporation would help, lenders be comfortable with the idea of lending to more than one person. There was a reply. Pat Park, I believe, replied and said, as far as he didn't know about S corporations, but he knew about LLCs. And in LLC, they'd want to look at the profitability of the corporation. And, so if you're just forming it for the purpose of, getting a good loan, that's not going to help much. So, but, so is it different with a S corporation?
I will say, first of all, I'm not an attorney, so I have to say that. I do know that an S corporation typically is an LLC. That an S corporation is how you file your taxes, so the taxes flow through to you, to an individual, a personal entity. So to Pat's point, lenders typically, unless you can show a history, like Star Community actually may be able to show a history of, I don't know your specifics financially, but they may be able to show a history of having purchased and serviced homes with rents, a combination of rents and home ownership that would enable them to go out and borrow as an LLC. But if you and I just formed a relationship for the purposes of buying a home together and living in it, the lender is not inclined to do that. Now, we could go out and buy a triplex and say we're going to rent out, a component of the property and make money off of that, and they may look at that circumstance. But if you get into a position where you're looking commercial, then you're looking at a commercial loan with different considerations. And those considerations can be achievable, but usually the loans are not amortized over a 30-year period. It's a shorter period, maybe 10, 15 years with a balloon payment at the end. Amortization might be over 30 years, but you have a balloon payment, which is okay. Interest rates might be a little bit higher than residential borrowing rates. And typically they're looking at what's the return on investment of the property, not, what is your ability to borrow and service the debt. So they're looking more at the property. But it's a little shift of the paradigm, if that makes sense. And if you get into a property that's 25 acres or more, I believe it is, then you're in commercial land. And so kind of by default, you're going to go into that model. And that's something to consider. And for an intentional community is a possibility.
So to me, the short answer is basically no.
Well, not no.
It's just that for intentional communities or most co-buy groups, it's not an advantage because it's the basis of what you can show as history, what you're going to do with it. And unless you're beginning a business and as a corporation, it doesn't enhance your likelihood of if you have the right lender.
Yeah,
anyway, not to contradict you, I was just piggybacking. I'm lifting up what you said.
Thank you. Yeah, you've got to be really driven to do that and have a plan. And does it happen? Yes, absolutely. So I wouldn't want to dissuade anyone, but I also, to Sid's point, don't want to lead you astray that that's going to happen easily or you're going to be embraced with open arms by your lending audience. So.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Wonderful, thank you. Jonathan, I see you, but Sylvan has had her virtual hand up for a bit, so we're going to go with Sylvan first, please.
Hi, I have a question for Pam about a particular demographic, but I have to say something very quick comment about the LLC issue, is that several of the homes at Sangaya have been purchased by LLCs, and when we had a developer put in a massive housing development next door, we bought one of those with an LLC of Sangayans. And it was a tremendous amount of work. And the two people who sort of drove that process had an enormous amount of business experience from many different businesses. They'd done LLC purchases before. They could write a detailed business plan. And they were able to get that loan pretty easily and straightforward because they had the pre-approval when it was ready to go. They had it just like you were saying, they had all the financing and all of the documents in place before the housing was even built. So that it worked really well for them, but it was a lot of work. My question is about the queer community. Has a lot of people who have a hard time buying houses for various reasons, sometimes having to do with trans IDs and the complexities of that, sometimes having to do with credit that has been trashed by weird life circumstances. And I know a lot of people who are interested in either buying together or renting together and living together as a group for safety's sake. Like Sid was talking about, there's a lot of physical safety in that, but find it very challenging. And I know that one of the benefits is making things more affordable, but are there legal ways to address not just the affordability hurdles, but the identity and trashed credit and weirdness that, I don't know if that's a clear question.
That's a great question and a very fair one. And interestingly, I would love if anybody has an LGBTQ loan officer connection. I would love to have that in our portfolio. I actually had one who he had formed a credit union, and I've lost him. I don't know what happened to him, but his email no longer works. He was affiliated with and I can't remember the original credit union, but then he went off and formed his own from that, and specifically educated me on the fact that he said there were like 13 states where it was legal to discriminate against LGBTQ borrowers, which kind of stunned me. I didn't know that anybody could be discriminated against, I mean, overtly. And so that was a key learning. So I would love if you could tell me somebody, I will tell you from my experience, most loan officers are not only not LGBTQ, but are kind of right-wing Christians, strangely. I mean, I'm kind of dumbfounded that that the field is so significantly swayed in that direction. And it impacts what people do and how they do it. And it's part of the problem. I think that the movement to online services is very powerful. And I think as we move to blockchain more and more, I think that's going to be very powerful. Blockchain is what crypto is built on. So essentially it's a decentralized access to protected financial activities. And I'm not doing this justice in its definition, but it's a path that I think is going to replace the web as we know it, but it's going to take decades for adoption to happen. But Sylvan, I hear what you're saying, and I can't tell you that I have an easy answer, except that I have loan officers who have worked with all sorts of folks and are willing to do that. But people specifically dedicated to that effort, I don't have, and I'd love to have in our portfolio, because I think it's a strong need and would be helpful.
Depending on how unjust it is that someone's credit rating is messed up, there are different resources to get help to challenge what it says on there. And then just an easy thing is, for now, both when you're buying and when you're renting, not everyone has to be on the lease. Not everyone has to have a credit check. And there's certainly places you can go that don't have a super conservative, corporate run renter thing. There's other ways around it. So some are going to be easier than others. And then when you're buying too, not only do not every person who wants to live there need to be a buyer, not only do they not have to be listed on the mortgage, but even though they still might be on the deed, everyone can have a different amount. It's not like a lot of people think like, oh, I'm not like making as much money as the rest of the people, but it doesn't have to be even shares, and it could be rent to own and many different things. So people don't have to have their life investigated if they're part of a group and don't want to be. They could be a lesser seen, lesser involved person on the front line of getting an initial loan or getting initially approved for a lease. So
many rental agencies, most rental agencies, and many renting individuals who own property that they rent require that everybody living there be on the lease. So,
but you don't have to tell them, and there's a lot of ways that you don't. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's the way it is. Yeah, here and elsewhere all the time.
Thanks, Sue.
Thank you. I think Jonathan had a question.
Well, Sid mostly answered my question, but I was, the discussion of loan officers really brings it up. What resources are there for people who want to do these kind of unconventional financial situations? Are there any alternative institutions they could go to? Is there a place where they could ask, if you don't know, where could they go to try to find out more, kind of thing? So there used to be a credit union in Colorado that called Sunrise, in I think it was Loveland, that would make loans to especially co-housing groups. But I just checked and they seem to be out of business. So that's not a resource. But I wondered if either Sid or Pam had any other leads that people.
So you're talking specifically about buying and get mortgages.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't have a lead right now. Pam's going to be your best resource for individual lenders, but I know there was a group back in Co-Opportunities days, just to bring a term out that you know, Jonathan, that was a very progressive group. And I also know someone who's in real estate who might work with a particular lender who is just a LGBTQ advocate all over the place and is, you know, like I said, a agent and a broker. So I'm gonna reach out and I'm gonna get with Pam and then follow up with us later if anyone, Jonathan, you or anyone else has questions about that. But Pam, you might know right away right now, like you have a list, not that you're giving out names necessarily right now, but I know you have a list and a couple other people that we know that would be lenders in this area that are very non-discriminatory. So
Pam, you're on mute.
Thanks, Angelique. I'm happy to get together a list of folks for you. And somebody, Neil mentioned home site, and if I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think home site does lower income.
yeah, and it's first time home buyer primarily.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is an option. There is
Homestead Community Land Trust.
That's right. There's Homestead. There's also the Washington State Bond Program, which provides a essentially second home mortgage that can be valuable for those who make under a particular combined income. So there are a host of opportunities that rely less on your credit score and less on the incomes of the group, and in fact don't allow borrowers of too high an income, that are beneficial, and you don't have to repay the second mortgage until you sell the home. So it could be never, and there's no interest on that loan from the Washington State bond organization. So, and as I said, Angelique, I'm happy to put together a list of things with Sid that we can provide the group for anyone who's interested.
I would love that. We do have a couple other things in the chat. I think this is fantastic, and it's part of this community that we've brought together today, is sharing these kind of resources. So I really appreciate it. We are running a little bit tight on time. We've got a couple minutes left. I know that Carol had a question, but I also wanted to put out that Pam and Sid, if you can send me your resources list, that would be fantastic. We can put it on the NICA webpage, and we can also send it out to those that have RSVP'd to join us today. And additionally, if you could also provide your websites for Under One Roof and for Seattle Co-Buy in the chat, that would be fantastic. We'll also have those available to all those who joined us today. And Carol, did you have our one last question?
Yeah, and actually I think it's pretty brief. I know that neither of you are attorneys. I am not looking for, you know, the legal answer, but I'm curious, just generally speaking, let's say you have a group of buyers and, you know, you've got one or two people who, you know, for various reasons may not be best served by being on the application or whatever, or, you know, or not putting them on the lease or whatever. Are there ways to bake in legal protections? You know, because not having someone on a lease then leaves possibly, and again, I mean, I don't even know all the legal ramifications, but, you know, are there ways to sort of like have sort of a legal thing going on one side, but not over on the other side? And just a very generic answer.
So I will tell you that there's, at least on in an ownership scenario, there is the mortgage side. And remember that mortgages are joint and severally liable. So all the parties to the loan are joint and severally liable for the entire repayment of the loan. So as Sid mentioned earlier, you can have all different kinds of ownerships, but at the end of the day, you've got to figure out how does that mortgage get repaid if the person with the most money, flees or passes or loses their job or whatever. And so those are the things that we solve for, those circumstances. Then on the other side, you have the ownership scenario and the occupancy scenarios.
Yeah.
That is separate. The lender doesn't want to know about that. Because everything's joint and severally liable. So they're going to look at, oh, this is a joint tenants with right of survivorship circumstance. That means essentially that everybody has equal ownership shares. And if anyone passes, their ownership goes directly to the other owners, right? So this is why our groups always do their co-ownership agreements after they close escrow, because at the end of the day, the attorneys are writing in language that protects the lender so that the joint and several liability is observed as it needs to be. But then the tenants in common may emerge where somebody has a 70% ownership and another person has a 10% ownership and another person has a 20% ownership. And that's all provisioned for in the ownership agreement and in how, what protections are provided for the what if scenarios that could occur. So the short answer is that yes, they can be separated, and how you deal with that is a matter of planning and legal help.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you. My internet is getting a little wonky for some reason, just in my room. Florian seems perfectly fine. But he's hardwired and I'm on Wi-Fi. So the perils of technology. I just wanted to say a really heartfelt thank you to both Pam and Sid for joining us today. This has been an incredibly informative discussion, and I really appreciate your knowledge. And thank you for all that you shared with us. I'm going to hand it back over to Jonathan. Great.
Okay. Well, thank you, Angelique, for moderating the panel, and thanks to our panelists for speaking. As you said, very, very informative. We really, really appreciate your contributing your wealth of knowledge to us and your willingness to answer questions and share resources in the future. I hope it's okay. We will link to your websites on our website so that other people can reach out to you as well. So for the last 15 minutes or so of our 12 minutes now of our being together, we would like to harvest the ideas that people were able to gain during this session. I think, Anita, are you ready to take notes on this? I think several of us will.
Jonathan, if it's fair, if we can let Sid and Pam escape, or it's up to you if you'd like to stay for the remaining couple minutes. I just want to be respectful of your time.
Thanks, Angelique, and thank you for having me. I do have to go somewhere, so I'm going to sign off, and it was a pleasure to see you all again, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pam.
Thank you. I'm going to run too, and Pam, I put your name of the business, but I didn't put the full URL, so if you want to do that, and then they'll post that to the website. People could look it up, just do a search, but I just wanted you to know I put that there. I took the...
Okay. All right. Thank you, Sid.
Thanks.
Okay.
I have a lawyer recommendation who does that sort of planning. If anyone is interested, or at some point in the future is interested, his name is Benjamin Premek, and he is in Bellevue. And I met him because he came to a conference on polyamory to talk about how to own and rent houses in groups of partnerships that are complicated. And he's delightfully wonderful. He's not queer, he's not poly, he's just wants that community to be able to be participating in normal functions of society. So he's pretty cool. Benjamin Premack. I can write it in the chat.
Thank you.
Okay, and I'd like to invite Florian to say a few words.
Yes, just for the board of NICA, we've had a group going for several years, running NICA, organizing the events. And in theory, we're supposed to have like 3 years terms at most, I think, and we're getting to that point. And so we want to invite new blood to join us and get involved either as volunteers or maybe as board members, so that we can cycle through and have more, people going in and out, taking a break, coming back. So yeah, if you're interested, we have board meetings every month right now. The next two, we always have 2 meetings planned in advance. And I believe the first Tuesday of the month is when they're happening for the next few months. I'm actually going to add the board meeting events back to the Facebook page. And I also write my email in the chat in case you need to ask any question about this, or if you need help to join the meetings. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now, if folks are willing, if you would just unmute yourself and say a sentence or two of what you found most valuable, what learning you got out of today, something new you learned, something you're going to be able to make use of. Let's just do this for the next 5 minutes or so. Please go on ahead.
Well, I learned a little bit about the challenges of getting a loan if you've got a intentional community. It sounds a little bit daunting, I'll confess.
The good news, Mark, is that we have NICA here to help you with questions and resources.
It was lovely hearing the positives that people in community, etc., were able to bring from the past year.
Thank you, everyone. It was great to be with you and learn about your communities. And I feel like there's great overlap and that we're all doing a great work together.
I think, it's nice just to hear that lots of people are thinking the same things, and many of you have been doing this for many years. As Rosie said, I think I tend to be the glass is half full, and I know that in the last year, I've seen so many instances of people helping one another. I mean, it's a silver lining of kind of a crappy time, and maybe even the last 4 years. And also the other thing is that it's kind of cool that we have these resources like NICA, as well as Sid and Pam and Benjamin Premack and all these people who are stepping up to do some of this work. I mean, wasn't happening so much 40 years ago or whenever. So yay.
I've been delighted to be here and see some old faces and tremendously excited about the new faces that I see. And so it's really been lovely to be with you this morning and this afternoon. Thank you so much.
And so many of me and my peers talk about living in intentional community, and it's very exciting and encouraging to hear about these different resources and know that so many people have like kind of driven the way. So thank you so much.
And I'll say thank you. It was wonderful hearing how we've been building on our strengths and our intentional communities this year, and just hearing all about all of the wonderful resources that we have as our own community. And I really enjoyed them. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing us all together. For me, it was just a delight to see that the heartbeat of NICA is going strong. New faces, old faces. Yeah, agree with most of what you said. Here, Nancy. And also for me, kind of holding this bigger picture of co-housing and also Foundation for Intentional Community roles. It was great for me to catch up with Pam and Sid and see how those models are addressing the needs of folks who have not really had an opportunity to be in community in the past. So we'll be reaching out to them again for another round just to see how we can support them. Yeah, that's it. It's good to be here. Remember that, Co-Housing Association and the Foundation for Intentionality are out there, also flying the flag, carrying the torch, and all that good stuff. So be in touch with us if we can be of any assistance to you. Thank you, Jonathan, for all the work that you've done and the board. It's just really very moving to me.
Okay. Oh, go ahead, Sylvan.
I just want to say that, as always, the networking is my very favorite part of any NICA event. I've already sort of been touching base with 2 or 3 people here in the chat that I want to follow up with and have other conversations and go visit and stuff. The actual program is always wonderful, but the people here are always the best part.
Thank you. Okay, well, again, thank you all for coming. I'm going to close with yet another song, another one of our old favorites. It actually comes from one of the song sheets I put together several years ago. And it's my hope that we will indeed be able to get together in person somehow this year. So, look out for that announcement. We'll, if we can, we'll try to pull something together in person, possibly as soon as this fall. So, with that, let me screen share one more time. There it is. This one. So, as we sing the song together, let's imagine that we're all standing in a circle holding hands, as we would if we were in person. And let this song carry us forward until we can meet again, as we hope. Love is but the song we sing, fear's the way we die. You can make the mountains ring, or make the angels cry. No, the bird is on the wing, and you may not know why. Come on, people now, smile on each other, everybody get together, try to love one another right now. Some will come and some will go, we shall surely pass. When the one that left us here returns for us at last, we are but a moment's sunlight fading in the grass. Come on, people now, smile on each other, everybody get together, try to love one another right now. If you hear the song I sing, you will understand. You hold the key to love and fear in your trembling hand. Just one key unlocks them both. It's there at your command. Come on, people now, smile on each other, everybody get together, try to love one another right now, right now, right now. All right.
Well, that
Okay.